Imagine for a moment a thinker so controversial, so polarizing, that his name alone stirs unease among scholars, laypeople, and spiritual leaders alike. A man who spoke of the death of God, challenged moral conventions, and dared to suggest that traditional values were chains that prevented human beings from achieving their true potential. This thinker is none other than Friedrich Nietzsche. But why is he so despised? Why does everyone seem to hate Nietzsche? In today's video, we are going to delve into this question. We will examine the ideas that made Nietzsche one of the most influential philosophers of all time, and simultaneously, one of the most misunderstood and reviled figures in intellectual history. By the end of this journey, not only will we unravel why Nietzsche has been the target of such intense criticism, but we will also see how his provocative ideas offer some of the most profound insights into human nature, society, and personal growth. And trust me, the most powerful and transformative revelation comes last, so stay with me until the end. Nietzsche's philosophy is one that invites deep reflection. At the heart of his work is the idea that we are living in a world that has become disconnected from meaning, truth, and purpose. He famously declared that God is dead, a phrase that has been widely misunderstood. What Nietzsche meant was not that God had literally died, but rather that the cultural and moral systems built around the idea of God were no longer effective. Humanity, he argued, was drifting through a kind of existential crisis where traditional religious values could no longer provide the sense of purpose they once did. This, Nietzsche believed, created a vacuum that needed to be filled with new values, values that were created by individuals, not imposed by society or religious institutions. But this leads us to the first reason why many people hate Nietzsche. His declaration of the death of God was seen as a direct attack on religion, particularly Christianity, which has been the foundation of Western moral systems for centuries. Nietzsche did not merely critique the church or its practices, he questioned the very foundation of Christian morality. In works such as The Antichrist and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche argues that Christian values such as humility, meekness, and self-denial are symptoms of a slave morality, a system of ethics designed to keep people weak and submissive. For many, this was blasphemy. Religion, for countless people, is the very bedrock of their lives. To suggest that the values they hold dear are the product of weakness, or that they are meant to suppress human potential, strikes at the core of their identity. Nietzsche's philosophy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the ways we live, and about the beliefs we hold. And naturally, many people react to this discomfort with anger and rejection. It's easier to dismiss Nietzsche as dangerous or offensive than to engage with the possibility that he might be right. Yet despite this, Nietzsche was not simply a critic of religion. His aim was to liberate humanity from what he saw as the chains of dogma and conformity. He believed in the possibility of creating new values, of living authentically according to one's own will and desires. This leads us to his concept of the Ubermensch, the overman, or superman, a figure who transcends the limitations of conventional morality and creates his own path in life. The Ubermensch is someone who rises above societal expectations, who embraces the chaos of existence, and who shapes meaning in a world that offers none. But herein lies another reason why Nietzsche is so hated. His idea of the Übermensch is often seen as elitist, even fascist by some critics. They argue that Nietzsche's celebration of individual strength and power can lead to dangerous ideologies that prioritize the strong over the weak. This misinterpretation has haunted Nietzsche's legacy, particularly in the aftermath of the Nazi regime, which co-opted parts of his philosophy, wrongly it must be said, to justify their ideology of racial superiority. Nietzsche himself, however, was vehemently opposed to nationalism and anti-Semitism. He wrote with disdain about German nationalism, and his relationship with his sister, who later edited his works, was fraught because of her anti-Semitic views. But, as is often the case with powerful ideas, Nietzsche's philosophy was twisted and manipulated to serve agendas that had little to do with his actual teachings. And because of this historical misuse of his work, many people today still associate Nietzsche with dangerous ideologies, fueling the hatred and misunderstanding surrounding him. So Nietzsche stands accused on two fronts. On one side, he is hated by those who see him as an enemy of religion and morality. On the other, by those who believe his ideas have fueled elitism and oppression. But here's the question we must ask ourselves. Are these accusations justified, or have we misunderstood Nietzsche's true message? As we continue to explore Nietzsche's philosophy, you'll begin to see that beneath the controversy, there is a deeply human message. Nietzsche challenges us not to tear each other down or dominate the weak, but to embrace the potential for greatness within ourselves. He asks us to take responsibility for our lives, to face the absurdity of existence with courage, and to find meaning not in prepackaged systems of belief, but in the creative act of living itself. In the next section, we will dive deeper into Nietzsche's ideas about morality, power, and the nature of human existence. We'll explore how these ideas can offer us valuable lessons on how to live authentically in a world that often feels disconnected from meaning. And most importantly, we'll uncover why Nietzsche's insights, though provocative, might just be the key to unlocking a life of purpose and fulfillment. Ready to continue on this journey of self-discovery and intellectual challenge? Then, let's move forward and see what Nietzsche truly has to offer. Let's continue our journey by exploring one of Nietzsche's most powerful and misunderstood concepts, the will to power. Now, this idea has been both praised and condemned by philosophers, psychologists, and political theorists alike. Some view it as an insightful look into human nature, while others criticize it as a dangerous celebration of dominance and control. But before we make any judgments, let's look at what Nietzsche actually meant by the will to power and why it's such a crucial part of his philosophy. The will to power, in its simplest form, is the fundamental driving force in human beings, the desire not just to survive but to thrive, to grow, to assert ourselves in the world. Nietzsche saw this as the essence of life itself. Every action, every desire, every ambition can be traced back to this fundamental drive. But it's important to clarify, the will to power is not necessarily about domination over others. It's about self-overcoming, the inner drive to surpass our own limitations, to become stronger, more capable versions of ourselves. Think about it. Every time you face a challenge, whether it's personal, professional, or even moral, you are confronted with a choice. Do you retreat, give in to fear, or stay within your comfort zone? Or do you push forward, overcome your inner resistance, and grow? Nietzsche would argue that the will to power is what compels you to take that second option. It's the force that pushes you to evolve, to rise above your circumstances, and to achieve something greater than what you were before. Yet many people recoil from this idea. Why? Because it places responsibility squarely on the individual. Nietzsche's philosophy demands that we stop blaming external factors, society, fate, even God, for our lot in life. He calls on us to embrace our freedom, but with that freedom comes the weight of responsibility. There's no one to save us, no higher power to guide our steps. It's up to us to create meaning, to shape our destiny, to strive for greatness. And for many, this level of responsibility is terrifying. It's much easier to believe that our lives are the result of forces beyond our control. This brings us to another reason why so many people hate Nietzsche, his radical individualism. Nietzsche challenges the notion that we should live our lives according to the expectations of others, whether those expectations come from society, religion, or tradition. He encourages us to break free from the herd mentality, the tendency to follow the crowd, to conform to the standards of others, rather than carve our own path. In his view, most people live lives of quiet conformity, afraid to break the mold, afraid to assert their own will. But Nietzsche wasn't content to just criticize. He also provided a path forward, a vision of what life could be if we embraced our individuality and harnessed our will to power. He urged us to cultivate what he called amor fati, a love of fate. This means accepting the reality of our lives, with all its hardships and challenges, not with resignation, but with a deep, profound affirmation. Nietzsche believed that only by embracing the totality of our existence, both the good and the bad, could we truly live fully. Instead of wishing for things to be different, instead of clinging to illusions, Nietzsche invites us to say yes to life as it is, to embrace the chaos, the uncertainty, and even the suffering, because all of it is part of the journey toward becoming who we are meant to be. But here's the twist. Nietzsche also believed that most people will never reach this level of self-actualization. In fact, he believed that the majority of humanity is content to remain in what he called a state of ressentiment. This concept of ressentiment is crucial to understanding why Nietzsche is so controversial. Ressentiment refers to a kind of deep-seated resentment and frustration that arises when people feel powerless or inferior. Instead of acknowledging and confronting these feelings, they project them outward, blaming others for their unhappiness, or worse, they seek to bring others down to their level. Nietzsche argued that many of the moral values we hold dear, particularly those rooted in Christianity, are born out of ressentiment. He saw Christian morality as a slave morality, a system of values created by the weak to justify their weakness and to subdue the strong. For Nietzsche, concepts like humility, meekness, and self-sacrifice were not virtuous in themselves. They were coping mechanisms developed by those who could not assert their own power, their own will. This is why Nietzsche's critique of morality was so explosive. It was not just a rejection of specific ethical systems, it was a challenge to the very foundation of how we think about good and evil. Now you might be thinking, does Nietzsche want us all to become selfish, ruthless individuals, trampling over others in our quest for power? Not quite. Nietzsche's philosophy is not a call for brute domination or egocentrism. He wasn't advocating for a society where only the strong survive and the weak are cast aside. Rather, he was urging us to transcend the conventional notions of strength and weakness altogether. The Ubermensch, or overman, that Nietzsche envisioned is not a tyrant or a conqueror, but someone who creates his own values, someone who embraces life fully, without needing to rely on external validation or societal norms. The Ubermensch is someone who has overcome ressentiment, who no longer blames the world for his suffering but instead takes ownership of his existence, creating meaning through his own will. But let's pause here for a moment. This idea that we can create our own values, that we can transcend traditional moral systems, is deeply unsettling for many people. It challenges everything we've been taught about right and wrong, about duty and obligation. It asks us to confront the possibility that the world is not as neatly ordered as we'd like to believe. That meaning is not something handed down to us from above, but something we must forge for ourselves. And for many, this is a frightening prospect. Nietzsche's philosophy demands a kind of courage that not everyone is willing to summon. And so Nietzsche is hated because he forces us to face uncomfortable truths. He tears down the comforting illusions we cling to, whether they be religious, moral, or societal, and leaves us standing in front of the abyss of existence with no guide but our own will to power. But at the same time, Nietzsche offers us something liberating. He shows us that we are not helpless, that we are not mere cogs in a machine, but creators, capable of shaping our own lives, our own destinies. In the next section, we will explore how Nietzsche's ideas have been misused and misunderstood over time, and why his philosophy continues to provoke such strong reactions. We'll also look at how his thoughts on the eternal recurrence, the idea that life repeats itself infinitely, offer a powerful perspective on how we can live our lives with purpose and meaning. Are you ready to continue? Let's dive deeper into Nietzsche's world. As we continue our exploration of Nietzsche's philosophy, we now arrive at one of his most enigmatic and thought-provoking ideas, the concept of eternal recurrence. This idea, while often overshadowed by Nietzsche's more controversial statements, is central to his philosophy and provides a key to understanding not only his views on existence, but also how we should live our lives. The eternal recurrence is the notion that everything we experience in life, every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, every failure, will happen again, over and over, in an infinite loop. Imagine for a moment that this life you are living, every decision you make, every action you take, will be repeated an infinite number of times, exactly the same way. Would you live differently? Would your choices carry more weight if you knew that you would have to live with them forever? Nietzsche presents this idea not as a metaphysical truth, but as a thought experiment, a challenge to confront life with the highest possible degree of affirmation. In his book, The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes of a demon who approaches you and tells you that your life, exactly as it is, will be repeated for eternity. How would you respond? Would you curse the demon and lament the prospect of reliving your life's pain and suffering endlessly? Or would you embrace it, affirming every moment, knowing that each experience, good and bad, is an integral part of the whole? This question is at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. For Nietzsche, to truly live well is to be able to embrace the eternal recurrence with joy, It is to live in such a way that you would not only accept your life as it is, but celebrate it, even if it meant reliving every hardship, every mistake, and every sorrow endlessly. The eternal recurrence forces us to ask, are we living lives that we would be willing to repeat for eternity? If not, what would we need to change to be able to say yes to this idea? This leads us to one of the most powerful and transformative aspects of Nietzsche's thought, the idea of amor fati, the love of fate. To Nietzsche, the eternal recurrence is not a burden to be feared, but an opportunity to cultivate a deep, life-affirming love for everything that happens in our lives. Amor fati means accepting our lives fully, not just the pleasant parts, but the struggles, the setbacks, the suffering. It means embracing everything as necessary, as part of the grand tapestry of existence, rather than wishing things were different. Here, Nietzsche departs from the pessimism of many of his philosophical predecessors. While thinkers like Schopenhauer viewed life as fundamentally tragic and full of suffering, Nietzsche saw an opportunity in that very suffering. He believed that it is through struggle and hardship that we grow, that we forge our character, and become who we are meant to be. Suffering, in Nietzsche's view, is not something to be avoided or resented. It is a necessary part of the human experience, and it is through facing and overcoming it that we become stronger. But this is precisely why Nietzsche's philosophy is so difficult for many to accept. Most people are conditioned to avoid suffering, to seek comfort and stability. Modern society, with its emphasis on convenience and ease, reinforces this tendency. We are told that happiness lies in the absence of struggle, in a life free from pain and difficulty. Nietzsche, however, offers a radically different perspective. He tells us that it is only through embracing the full spectrum of life's experiences, the highs and the lows, that we can truly live fully and authentically. Yet this idea, like many of Nietzsche's ideas, has been misunderstood and misused throughout history. One of the most notorious misinterpretations of Nietzsche's philosophy is its association with totalitarian ideologies, particularly Nazism. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, for example, was grotesquely distorted by the Nazi regime to justify their notions of racial superiority and dominance. But it's important to emphasize that Nietzsche himself had no such intentions. In fact, he was deeply opposed to nationalism, anti-Semitism, and any form of oppressive power structures. His work was co-opted and manipulated after his death, primarily by his sister, who held anti-Semitic views and sought to align Nietzsche's ideas with her own political agenda. Nietzsche's Ubermensch was not a symbol of racial or political superiority, but rather an ideal of personal transcendence and self-overcoming. The Ubermensch is someone who creates their own values, who rises above the limitations of conventional morality and societal expectations. It's about internal strength, not external dominance. Unfortunately, this nuance was lost in the historical misuse of Nietzsche's ideas, leading many to associate his philosophy with dangerous ideologies that Nietzsche himself would have vehemently opposed. This brings us to a critical point in our discussion. Why does everyone hate Nietzsche? Is it because of his radical ideas, or is it because his philosophy has been so deeply misunderstood and misrepresented? In many ways, Nietzsche's provocative language and challenging ideas make him an easy target for misinterpretation. He speaks of the death of God, the will to power, and the Ubermensch in ways that can easily be twisted to support agendas far removed from his original intentions. But beyond the misunderstandings, there is another deeper reason why Nietzsche is so hated. He forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in. Nietzsche pulls no punches in his critique of modern society, religion, and morality. He tells us that much of what we hold dear, our values, our beliefs, our sense of purpose, is built on illusions. He challenges us to strip away the comforting narratives we cling to and face the world as it truly is, chaotic, indifferent, and without inherent meaning. For many, this is too much to bear. Nietzsche's philosophy demands a level of courage and intellectual honesty that few are willing to embrace. It asks us to take responsibility for our own lives, to stop blaming external forces for our circumstances, and to create meaning in a world that offers none. This is no easy task, and for many it is easier to reject Nietzsche's ideas outright than to engage with the existential challenges they present. But for those who are willing to take up Nietzsche's challenge, His philosophy offers a path to profound personal growth and liberation. Nietzsche's vision of the Ubermensch, his concept of the will to power, and his idea of eternal recurrence all point toward a way of living that is not bound by societal norms or religious dogma. It is a way of living that embraces the full complexity of human existence, the joy, the suffering, the chaos, and finds meaning not in external validation, but in the creative act of living itself. In the final part of this video, we will explore how Nietzsche's ideas can be applied to our lives today. We will look at practical ways to embrace Nietzsche's philosophy of self-overcoming and amor fati, and how we can use these ideas to live more authentic, purposeful lives in a world that often feels disconnected from meaning. Stay with me. The most important revelation is yet to come. Let's continue on this journey of self-discovery and intellectual challenge. Now that we've explored Nietzsche's core concepts, it's time to bring his ideas into our daily lives. After all, Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher who wanted to provoke intellectual debates. He wanted to inspire action, to motivate people to live more fully, more authentically. His philosophy, at its heart, is a call to transcend the mediocrity of life and to embrace the power we all have within us to shape our own destiny. So, how do we apply Nietzsche's philosophy to our own lives? How can we become more like the Ubermensch, the self-actualized individual who creates their own values and affirms life in all its complexity? First, we must confront the reality of our existence, the idea that life at its core is neither inherently meaningful nor fair. Nietzsche famously declared, "God is dead." This statement wasn't simply an attack on religion. It was a recognition that for many, the old systems of meaning that once guided humanity, religion, tradition, established morality, no longer held the same power. We live in a world where the certainties of the past have crumbled, leaving many feeling lost, adrift in a universe without clear direction. For Nietzsche, this recognition is not something to mourn, but to celebrate. The death of God, in Nietzsche's view, frees us from the constraints of dogma and allows us to create our own values, our own meaning. But this freedom is not without its challenges. Without the safety net of tradition or divine guidance, we are left with the terrifying task of constructing meaning in a world that offers none. This is where the concept of self-overcoming comes into play. Nietzsche believed that the most powerful and meaningful way to live is to constantly push ourselves beyond our current limitations. It's not enough to simply follow the rules set by society or to live passively according to the expectations of others. We must actively engage in the process of becoming, of evolving, of striving to be better, stronger, more authentic versions of ourselves. The will to power, in this sense, is not about exerting control over others, but about mastering ourselves, overcoming our weaknesses, fears, and doubts. Take a moment to reflect. What are the limitations you've placed on yourself? Are there beliefs or habits that are holding you back from living fully? Nietzsche would challenge you to confront these limitations head-on, to embrace the discomfort of growth, and to continuously push yourself toward greater self-realization. This isn't an easy path, but Nietzsche believed that it is only through struggle and overcoming that we can become truly free, truly alive. But Nietzsche's philosophy is not just about individual empowerment. It's also about how we relate to the world around us. One of the most profound aspects of Nietzsche's thought is his idea of amor fati, the love of fate. To practice amor fati means to embrace everything that happens in life, not just the good, but also the painful and difficult moments. It means accepting reality as it is, rather than wishing it were different. Consider how often we resist the events of our lives, how we wish things had gone differently, how we replay scenarios in our minds, longing for a different outcome. Nietzsche saw this as a waste of energy, a distraction from the true task of living. Instead, he urged us to love our fate, to say yes to every experience, no matter how challenging or painful, because each moment, each event, shapes us and contributes to our growth. Amor fati is not about passive acceptance, it's about active affirmation. It's about taking responsibility for our lives, for our choices, and for the circumstances we find ourselves in. Rather than blaming others or external forces for our difficulties, Nietzsche invites us to see every experience as an opportunity for growth, for self-overcoming. This radical acceptance of life in its totality allows us to live with greater freedom and joy, unburdened by regret or resentment. But here's the challenge: loving your fate is no easy task. it requires immense courage and resilience. It requires us to confront the darkest parts of our existence and to find meaning even in suffering. Nietzsche never shied away from the harsh realities of life, but he also saw the potential for greatness in embracing those realities fully. He believed that through our struggles, through our suffering, we are given the opportunity to transform ourselves, to rise above our circumstances, and to create something beautiful out of chaos. This brings us back to the idea of eternal recurrence. Imagine living your life in such a way that you could embrace the idea of living it over and over for eternity, without wishing for anything to be different. Imagine having such a deep love for life, with all its messiness and unpredictability, that you could affirm it in its entirety. This is the ultimate challenge of Nietzsche's philosophy, to live in such a way that you would not only accept the eternal recurrence, but embrace it joyfully. Now, as we come to the end of our journey through Nietzsche's world, it's important to acknowledge that his philosophy is not for everyone. Nietzsche knew that most people would resist his ideas because they are difficult, demanding, and often uncomfortable. His philosophy requires us to take a hard look at ourselves, to question the values we've inherited, and to take responsibility for creating our own path in life. This is no small task, and it's understandable why many would prefer the comfort of established norms and beliefs. But for those who are willing to take up Nietzsche's challenge, his philosophy offers a path to profound personal liberation. Nietzsche shows us that we are not victims of fate, nor are we bound by the limitations imposed by society or tradition. We are creators, capable of shaping our own lives, our own destinies, through the choices we make and the values we embrace. So what does Nietzsche leave us with? A call to live courageously, to embrace life in all its complexity, to affirm our existence with passion and purpose. He reminds us that the only meaning in life is the meaning we create, and that true freedom comes from self-overcoming and the love of fate. As we conclude, I leave you with this final thought. What would your life look like if you embraced Nietzsche's philosophy? If you loved your fate, if you lived as though each moment would be repeated for eternity, would you make different choices? Would you live with more intention, more courage, more joy? Nietzsche believed that we all have the potential to rise above mediocrity, to become more than what society expects of us, to live fully and authentically. But it's up to us to take that step, to challenge ourselves and to become the creators of our own destiny. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Nietzsche's philosophy. I hope you found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as I have. Now, the question is, how will you live your life differently after this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, keep striving, keep questioning, and keep pushing yourself toward your highest potential. Thanks for looking.